You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Well, I want to welcome you to the Greek reading group. I'm Fred Long, and we're going to pick up in Ephesians chapter 4. We're looking at the description of Christ's victory and the aftermath of that victory. So last time we were looking at the distribution of grace to each person. So if we go back just a little bit to look at the context, to each person, grace was given. So, and this is according to the measure of the gift of the Christ. So, yeah. So this, pardon me, got sounds going off of my computer. So, we're gonna look at then the distribution of the gifts in terms of gifted leaders. So Jesus himself in verse 11, he has given apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers. Now these gifted leaders here, and there's a list of them connected with the men, these serve purposes. We saw last time in verse 12, for example, they're serving the purpose to build up the saints. And here the saints are mending of the saints, really, preparing, equipping. This genitive is an objective genitive, where the verbal idea of the head noun is taken up in the genitive as like the object. And the same thing happens with the next prepositional phrase, is ergon diakonias. This is like the direct object of the verbal idea. And then the same thing with the building up of the body of Christ. So Christ is the owner of the body, and the building up of that body is like the body is like the object of the building up. So you have these three prepositional phrases that are purposive. So Christ gives these gifted leaders for the express purpose of mending of the saints, for the working of ministry, for the building up of the body of Christ. Now, the ultimate purpose is given in verse 13 as this kind of destination, mekri. Mekri is an improper preposition. We looked at this last time, but this is just by way of kind of review, getting us to the point where we can pick up in verse 14. This mekri is an improper preposition. It can be used with as a preposition. It can also be used as a conjunction, and here it's used as a subordinating conjunction with a subjunctive mood verb until, so it construes extension in time, but also a sense of purpose, like this is the goal, and this goal is that we all, so e pantes is the subject going with the subjunctive mood verb, which is first plural subjunctive. It means attain, like to attain, and then we see that in a similar way as we saw before. There are three purpose attainments, attaining. Now, the first one is the unity of the faith, and of the knowledge of the Son of God. Basically, the faith is here, I think, understood as a body of belief and practice. So we can indeed be unified in around the faith and the knowledge. So the faith concerns knowing the Son of God, and that Son of God is obviously Jesus Christ. Now, this title, this knowing, this title of knowing the Son of God, which again is an objective genitive, like knowing is an active kind of noun, and the content, or really the object of what is known is the Son of God. And so Jesus is that Son of God. The Son of God is a political title. It is the height of Roman imperial titles. It is right up there. When the emperor died, he was divinized, was understood as becoming a god, and that made his adoptive heir the son of a god. And so a very common title is Divi Filius, which is the Latin son of a divine one. Divi put forward in the genitive Latin in front of Filius, which means son. So this is a very high political title. So the goal of the community is to grow up into Jesus, who is the Son of God, into the knowledge of him as Son of God. And then you have another prepositional phrase, is andra telion, to the perfect man. I think this perfect man is Jesus. This is a title of a king in the East. This is a kingly title as well, the perfect man. I think it probably would relate to a Greek philosophical world or conception. Syrian kings were called the perfect man. So I think this is another way of describing who Jesus is. The perfect man is a mature man, like the person who is a model of what it means to be a person. And then the last is, you got three ises here. Is is the measure, into the measure of the stature of the fulfillment of the Christ. So here you have three genitive nouns piling on top of each other, building on this idea of the metron. The metros, metron is the word for measure or standard. So the standard, and then the elikias is genitive. This means like maturity, like being grown up. And then of the fullness, I think rather than fullness, the translation of fulfillment is better. And the fulfillment of who is the fulfillment of the maturity, which becomes the standard for us. That's what we have to think about. Who becomes that standard of maturity? Well, that standard of maturity is, the measure of that is indeed the Christ. And Christ is the Jewish title for translation of Messiah. And so Jesus is, once again, the standard set before us as Son of God, as perfect human, as a mature man, as the fulfillment that he brings about. So we're to grow up in the faith, in the unity of the faith, and the knowledge of Jesus in his various ways that we can understand him as a Son of God, as perfect human, as the standard of maturity. And so last time I mentioned that this word metron is really significant, the standard of maturity. Now, I presented a paper many years ago, Jesus Christ, the measure of all things. I began researching this word, and it actually is, here's a part of the paper right here. I'm not going to read all this to you, But there was a saying that was debated, that humans are the measure of all things. And Plato rebuts that. He rebuts that on the basis that if that's the case, human life is very unstable and in flux. In fact, he argues against the notion on the basis of Protagoras' idea that man is the measure of all things, based on the principle of Heraclitean flux. So Heraclitus was another philosopher, and Plato rebuts this idea that man is the measure of all things on the basis that there's too much flux. And he uses analogies of wind and wave and talks about this. And so you can stop the video and read a little bit of my summary of that discussion. But this becomes very significant because later in Plato's work, The Laws, he talks about an alternative statement, and that is God is the measure of all things. And I think that this principle should guide us in the establishment of the ideal state. So he's envisioning the ideal state in a certain way. Now, it's intriguing that in the context that we are in, and here we're going to pick up right at verse 14, that in fact, Paul begins talking about waves and winds. And after he affirms that Jesus is our standard, our metron, I think that's very significant. Okay, so let's pick up in verse 14. So there's a lot of purpose statements, that Jesus gives these gifted leaders for certain purposes. We've been looking at that. And then it leads to an ultimate purpose, a mekri, until, and then featured at the goal of that is growing up in unity around Jesus, our measure of maturity. Now, those are positive purpose statements, but we come next to a negative purpose statement in order that we would no longer be infants. So here we are in this context of maturity, growing up into adulthood versus remaining infants. So in other words, as we grow up into Christ, this prevents us from remaining infantile in our thinking. And this infantileness is seen in verse 14. And this infantile state, this immature state, is described by way of these participles. Now, these participles are a postposition explaining how it is that they're explanatory, how it is that that we would be infants. What does it look like to be infants? Well, to be infants is to be tossed about like a wave, to be tossed around like a wave and borne about by means of every wind. And the winds are teachings. And these teachings are in the deceitfulness of humanity. And moreover, it's described in terms of the deception, the craftiness, in close proximity to the method of deceit. Now, what a list of qualifiers here. You have three of them. So it's interesting. We have these sets of three prepositional phrases. And so this stylistically, this is quite intriguing that you have three prepositions. Now you have three prepositions which are kind of describing the manner or the context in which this teaching, which tosses about, keeps people infantile, keeps them immature. And we learn from this description here that the kind of teaching is human scale teaching. It has to do with humans. Humans are associated with this teaching, but at the same time, it's connected to a methodia, a plan, a scheme. Now, this word scheme occurs at the end of Ephesians, only twice in Ephesians. This scheme occurs at the end of Ephesians, and you have to look at it. It's right around verse 6, 11, 12, 13, and it talks about the schemes of the devil. So one of the schemes, I would suggest, one of the schemes of the devil is in the broad dissemination of human teaching, which is keeping us immature, blowing us around by every wind and doctrine of humanity, in the deceitfulness of humanity. There is deception there. There is deceit. There is craftiness in this approach. And we're subjected to it. I would say that this is what we're subjected to today. We could go to verses like Romans 12:2, which talks about, Paul says there, do not be conformed to the pattern of this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So there we have this kind of world environment in which is pressing in on us. And I would say that this is the context that we find ourselves in today. And we're subjected to all kinds of fads, news stories, ways of construing the world. Worldviews are pressing in on us in our various cultures. I mean, I'm only familiar with the Western culture, and particularly America, and maybe even then, a little bit of a Southern culture here in Kentucky. But, you can watch the news, you can you can see the news streams. And I would say that there are hidden within these, and not so hidden, messages about what's important, what's of ultimate value, what you should, how you should govern your life in relation to these. All of this is a part of causing us to not grow up into Christ and to be mature and to look at the measure of the standard that is the Christ. All of these are ways to keep us immature and infants in the world. Okay, infantile. And indeed, apparently, a lot of people, even though they're adults, have an emotional level of like a 12 or 13-year-old. Emotionally, I think that age, at least in American culture, it's a rough age. And there are injuries to our psyche, injuries to ourselves, that keep us stuck and emotionally immature. But in Christ, if we set him as our standard, and if inasmuch as the gifted leaders of the church are doing their work, which, by the way, consists of mending. The first thing that is listed there is mending. This equipping is kind of a mending. It's repairing. It's a preparing. If that kind of work is being done by these leaders, that's going to help us to grow up so that we will no longer be infants. All right. So is that making sense? Any questions? Any questions? I'm looking for any. I don't see any. And just speak up. Okay. We're going to go on to verse 15 here. I need to clean up my screen a little bit. It's kind of messy, a little bit messy here. Now I'm going to read the text. Alethou ontes de en agape, aux e somen is avton ta panta, os estin e kephale Christos, ex u pan to soma, sunar mologumenon, ke sum bibadzomenon, dia passes aphaestes epikoregias kata en ergian en metro enos ekastu merus ten aux esin tu somatos piite is ikodomain e avtu en agape. Okay, great verse here. Sorry for the screen. Looks like it's a little bit messed up there. It's kind of repaired. What I see here going on is a subjunctive mood verb here. Aux auno. Aux auno. This is a aorist active subjunctive first plural. And I think we could understand this as a hortatory subjunctive. Let us grow. Let us grow. And we're growing into him, tapanta. So let us grow everything to him. Now, the tapanta could also be understood adverbally. So I could put like a dotted lines around it. In my marking method, you put dotted, you circle dotted to indicate adverbs. So we're to grow up all things, or perhaps in every respects into him. We're to grow up into him. So here's the destination once again, and this hortatory subjunctive is urging us to do so. So de is a connector, meaning more, probably here I'd say moreover, truthing in love. So let's look at this participle. So this is a present active participle, masculine nominative plural. It is prepositioned in front of the main verb here. And this is the first subordinate clause. So I put brackets around subordinate clauses. So what is this circumstantial participle? Circumstantial, there's no article in front of it. What is this circumstantial participle doing in relation to the main verb? Well, in my model of information structure of participles, which I talk about in my koine Greek grammar, chapter 17, I described that there are three possible uses or information functions of participles when they occur, circumstantial participles, when they occur before the main verb. The first one, which is furthest away, tends to be is called a segue. That's usually used in narrative to talk about movements. That we don't have that here. The other one, next closest, is called framework, an important framework, or context, I would say. And that's what we have here, truthing in love. And this verb truthing may entail speaking the truth. In other words, being truthful in all regards, particularly even in our speech. So being truthful, and this truthfulness is governed by love. So love indicates the manner in which this truthing takes place, being truthful in speech, in love. And this is important because let's face it, some people, we can be truthful. We can speak truthfully in a way that is not loving, not in love, not tempered by valuing the other, caring for the other. So there is a very, and then it's also possible to love in a way that's not truthful. There's a way to encourage or, approve, maybe even condone somebody, thinking that we're loving, but it's not being done in truth. So to combine truth and love together is really important when we think about it. Being truthful, but being truthful in a way that also shows care, love, concern for the other. And this provides the framework, the context in which we are to grow up into him. So this is what's called a hortatory subjunctive with this framework, which is so important, this kind of framework of virtue, of love, combined with the virtue of truthfulness. So we're to grow up into him. Now, this him is going to be elaborated upon in this os clause, this os estin e kephale Christos. Who is the head, namely Christ. And that's a little equal sign there, because Christos is in opposition to the head, e kephale. Christ is the head, and this head envisions a body. So we are Christ's body. So if you go back to the end of chapter 1 of Ephesians, we are described as the body of Christ. And this head body language, as I've mentioned many times, but I'll say it again, is ancient political language. It's taken up as a metaphor to describe the emperor in relation to the Roman Empire, the Roman people, which are the body. So Seneca, when he's writing to the young Emperor Nero, writes a piece called De Clementia, and he describes Nero as the emperor, as the soul, as the head of the body of the rest of the Roman world, the people. So Christ is our head, and we are his body. Now, so this is the second subordinate clause. So I put little brackets with 2, and then there's a third one that gets started. And maybe I'll just change my subordinate clauses here. From whom? From whom? So what you're getting here is elaboration on who the him is, the him. And we know that the him refers back to Christ, but there's a lot of elaboration. From whom? So from whom here is describing origin. This preposition ek is describing like the origin of things. So we're getting a description more about the next part, and that is namely the body. So the whole body, pan soma. Pan is put into gray highlight, pan, because the gray highlight in my color coding indicates quantity specifier. So whenever there's quantity explicitly mentioned, these are significant to pause and to ponder, like, why is quantity being described here? And so these are good places to pause and ask that question. Pasapan indicates inclusive scope. So it's the whole body, not just parts of the body, but the whole body. From whom? The whole body. And then we get these participles being fitted and being held together. So you're getting another subordinate clause. So here is 4 subordinate clauses, and I'm going to go ahead and just combine these participles. And they're held together through or by means of every joint of supply. So here you have a couple more prepositional phrases. According to the working, which is in the measure of each one member, each individual member. So you're having a piling up, and we're wondering what these participles, these fitted, being fitted, and being held, what are these modifying? I mean, it's got this, it's a huge clause that has, let me look at all these prepositional phrases again. Oh, once again, you get 3 prepositional phrases. So the question is what are these participles hanging off of? Well, they're going with the main verb. So here's the main verb way at the bottom, makes. So this is a present, middle passive, indicative, third singular. This is going with soma, the body makes. So the main sentence here, I want to put it into purple. This is the main sentence. The body makes the growth of the body. So that is the main sentence. So tein auxesin is the direct object. So the body makes for itself or does in relationship to itself. This is probably functioning as a middle. So it's kind of, we have to think of, this is something that the body is doing to itself. It makes the growth of the body, of itself. So the body is growing in relationship to itself. So the body is growing in relationships to itself. And then this is where this participle clause, if we go here, then this is a big subordinate clause that is providing, again, a framework, a context, an understanding of how this occurs. Basically, is that what's being affirmed here is that in God's wisdom, there is this being held together and working together through a working energia of each to the measure or standard of each individual part. So each individual part plays a role. And it's in the measure of, in the standard of, which is interesting because this is the 3rd time this word occurs. So there's grace has been given according to the measure of each individual member. I think that's in 4:7. Then we saw Christ as the measure or standard of maturity. And now each individual measure, person, part of the body in their measure, in their proportion, or in their way, they contribute to this mutual fittedness and growing togetherness of the body. What's happening here is that Paul is extending this metaphor of the body. So Christ is the head, we are his body, and now he's kind of looking at the conglomerate of this body, which is made up of each individual part, which each has an important role to play in terms of the growing of the body. And the purpose of this body is to grow. And how do we grow? We grow by truthing in love. And we're energized. We have the working of the Holy Spirit so that we can grow through this working. And this is something that God gives grace to each one of us so that we can contribute to the working of the body, that we can contribute to its growing. So the growth of the body, to come back then to the main sentence, is for the building up of itself. So this is a reference once again to the body. So this body is growing and is growing itself. And so there's a lot of reflexivity here in the middle form here, in referencing to using the reflexive pronoun, the building up of itself, which again is like an objective genitive, building itself up. And then the final kicker here, the manner, probably I would say manner. Manner, is it the means? Well, we could talk about that. Is in love. In love. So there's a framing of truthing in love up here, which we'd mentioned, truthing in love. And there's an ending with love being the manner. Wow. So this is a really interesting description of the growth of the body. The goal of it is Jesus. Goal is into him. The means, I would say, would be the working of each part, each individual part, and the manner is truthing in love. Now, this idea of truth is important. We're going to come to that maybe today. We'll see how quickly we go. Got 20 minutes, but truth is very significant, and we'll see that in the next section. Okay, so I don't know if there's any questions, comments. If you have a question, you can unmute yourself and ask. Okay, I'm looking. All right. Well, let's keep going on then. So, clean slate here. And so we got an un. Oh, there is one question. Let me take that question. Yes, so just someone mentions Mangal, that gifts of the leaders and individual working should go together. Absolutely. Absolutely. There should be a coordination. Yeah, and I think what needs to be really set before us, I mean, what I'm really getting from this passage, and I understand this, generally, but what I'm really seeing this passage stress is the focus on Jesus, particularly Jesus as the standard, the measure of what we grow into. Yeah, Jesus as the standard and measure. Yeah, and so that we need to keep that as the goal. And Paul's going to say something in what follows. It's going to be, I don't know if we'll get there, but in 4:20, he's going to say the truth is in Jesus. And I think he's speaking about the historical Jesus, particularly. Now, we know that Jesus has been raised from the dead and that he's seated at the right hand of God. Like, that is well established in the context. But there's something about us needing to focus on the historical Jesus, particularly as is recorded in the Gospels. There's something about his life, his priorities, what he's up to there. So, yeah, and I'm always struck by that need, which of course is kind of obvious, but what was his goal? What were the kinds of things that he was doing? Who was he associating with? What values is he conveying in his teachings, in his actions? and his actions in terms of his ministry and reaching out to people, but also his prophetic actions. Who is he in conflict with and over what? And what do we learn from that today? Because I think we're called to the same full-rounded ministry, not just certain parts of the ministry. Now, each one of us can't do all of what Jesus did. It'd be hard for us to do that, but we can certainly support each other in those various tasks. And not all of us can be involved in prison ministry, but we can certainly support that. And maybe some of us might go and help lead Bible studies there, or help with development or help with the poor in supporting the outreach to the poor, or after school educational initiatives to help kids with their homework, and these kinds of things. So there's a different variety of ministries, but we all need to work together and coordinate together. And the goal is to attain to a maturity that is in Christ. Yeah. All right. So looking on at 4:17, we get a kind of a dismal description of humanity, fallen humanity. And Paul really teased this up with this statement, tuto un. So un is marking development and inference. There's an inference here. So un is a connector that marks inference and distinctive development. Therefore, I say this, and I testify in the Lord. Well, what's remarkable about this is you got these present tense verbs, is that this whole thing, I say this and testify in the Lord, the tuto is forward pointing. And it's forward pointing to this, really this infinitive clause. And I'm marking this all the way to the end. I'm starting brackets here. This is all one big, this all belongs together. And there's going to be a lot of moving parts to this. This is all the clause, the infinitive clause. This is an infinitive clause of indirect statement. And probably we could understand it as an implied imperative. So the initial statement that Paul would have said is, don't walk any longer this way. So that's the initial, that's the direct command or the direct statement. Instead, he puts it in an indirect statement, and that's why we have the infinitive. Now, this umas is the subject of the infinitive. We often call that, the subject of the infinitive. Really, I guess it's an accusative of reference, but it is actually the agent subject of the action of the verb parapatin. Parapatin is a present active infinitive from parapateo. The epsilon contract matches, combines with the infinitive ending. And so we see this circumflex accent right there. So that's the present tense suggesting ongoingness. What is interesting about this is that all of this is a meta comment. It tees up the indirect discourse. And so this is a rather large meta comment. I say this and I testify in the Lord. This is all adding to the urgency of the indirect command. I think it's interesting, though, that it, in some ways, it takes away some of the potency. Like if you would have just directly commanded them, no longer walk. That's an imperative. But to put it as an indirect statement, in some ways, kind of lessens the force of that. But then on the other hand, this large meta comment really injects his voice even more prominently. And then particularly when he adds testify, he's testifying in the Lord. That is heavy. That makes this very heavy. So on the one hand, there's a lessening of the directness because it's put into indirect discourse. On the other hand, this meta comment, the way that he introduces it, really tees it up. And he tees it up also with the tuto. This tuto is forward pointing. Stephen Runge would call this a forward pointing device, and really points forward to the whole clause. So all of this makes it rather prominent. And so, yeah, this is a prominent description. No longer you walk, just as. So the kathos starts a comparative clause. So no longer be living or walking as, even. And then here you have an adverbial use of ke, thematic addition, as the nations are walking. So you no longer walk as the nations are walking. And I think this clause probably ends right here. Possibly we could extend it to a little bit further. We could extend that across the prepositional phrase, in the vanity or the emptiness of their mind. So the nations are walking with futility. There's a futility in their mind, an emptiness, or it doesn't have a suitable goal or a real clear goal. There's kind of an emptiness or purposelessness in their thinking. They're not really thinking long term. There's a futility in what they're doing, an emptiness. So don't walk like them in the futility of their mind. Now, just to take a step back from this, it's intriguing that these nations are differentiated from the audience. Now, this audience is comprised of probably Jew and Gentile, Jew and nation. Particularly, I think the nations, however, we can go back to the earlier parts of the letter and walk about that really Paul is describing that the body of Christ is comprised, it's one body, it's not two, comprised of believing of Jews and Gentiles that have been reconciled together. So go back to chapter 2, look around verse 14, 15. Christ is our peace. He's reconciled both to God and brought us together, the body together. And he says in chapter 2 that you were once alienated from the citizenship of Israel, but now in him you are co-citizens of the saints. Now, the saints is a way of describing the faithful within the Judean people. So the saints are kind of it's an apocalyptic description of those who remain faithful, and they're almost like the faithful remnant. And so the Gentiles, you are now made co-citizen members. So if you go back and look at 2:12, 11 to 20, this is very clear. And you're co-citizens now, presumably of a re-understanding of Israel. And I think that is indeed the case, that Israel is made up of believing Jew, believing Gentile. I think if you look at the argument in Romans 11, I've got a Greek reading group through that, which is working through that. It's going to be released in the next few months. But I lay out arguments there that the olive tree of Romans 11, there's branches cut off due to unbelief, presumably Jews. You have Gentiles grafted in. They're being grafted into Israel, the olive tree. And the Gentiles shouldn't be arrogant because it's easy to graft people back in. So what's happened, I think, in Paul's understanding is that the people of God, Jesus reconfigures that people around the 12 disciples. And whether you believe in Jesus, the Jewish Messiah, or not, is what qualifies you entrance into the restored, renewed people of God, Israel. And here in Ephesians 4:17, the fact that Paul can say to the Gentile audience, you're no longer to live like the nations, indicates that they've come out of that realm. And they're no longer identified in that way. In fact, they're co-citizens of the saints. Okay, so that's important to kind of see this. Now we're going to get some descriptions of what this Gentile living in the futility of their mind, what that looked like. One, having been darkened in regard to their understanding. This is a post-nuclear participle. It's a circumstantial participle, which is coming after the main verb. And so in this sense, it's explanatory. It's explaining what this walking in the futility of the mind looked like. It's describing it in terms of a darkening in regard to, in the space of respect to their understanding. They were having been darkened. And the ontes is part of this circumstantial clause, actually. And so you actually have a periphrastic circumstantial participle clause, which is really kind of gnarly to think about. This ontes is entirely unnecessary. He could have just said, having been darkened, but to add the ontes amplifies this construction such that the darkenness becomes even more emphasized as a attribute of who these Gentiles, of what they become. They become darkened. Moreover, it's also in the perfect tense, which is stressing the resultant effect. There's a darkening. This darkening is significant. This darkening is significant because they're not walking in the light. They're not walking in revelation. Now, another aspect of this is having been alienated, and they're alienated in respect to, or being alienated, this takes a direct object of the genitive, being alienated from, they're being alienated from the life of God. And this perhaps is the most terrible consequence here. And this is, again, explanatory, explaining more about this vanity of their mind, a consequence of this having been darkened, this vanity of living, the vanity of their mind, this emptiness, is tragically being alienated from the life of God. That's tragic. And again, the alienation is real, and this is a perfect participle, middle passive participle, stressing that resultant effect. I have a good counseling friend, and helping him kind of, he's working with clients, and as he's trying to recognize the common issues that we face and that people face, one of the most fundamental issues that he sees, and that this verse, as we talk about it, I've mentioned this to him, is alienation. Fear and alienation that is being isolated, not being in community, and particularly alienated from the kind of life that God wants for us. And that's the tragedy of being kicked out of Eden. In Eden, we had an everlasting life situation. We were kicked out of Eden. And ever since, I think we struggle with feeling alone, feeling alienated. We're not in relation like we would like to be, which is certainly the case. And so in the gospel, there's restoration. We have a body that we can belong to that's supposed to work together. We're supposed to coordinate and grow together in love and truth. And so that's, there's a unity around that. And so, yeah, this is describing the Gentile life, really the lack of life, the alienation. Now, we're going to get with this dia, this prepositional phrase, we're going to get a description of what else, of why that occurs. So dia with the accusative indicates cause or basis, because of the ignorance in them. So here we get another prepositional phrase, in them. And it's interesting that this usan, tain usan, that is completely unnecessary. That is a second attributive position of the verb imi put as a participle. This is modifying tain agno ni an. You really just don't need that. That's unnecessary, but its presence is stressing the ontological nature of this ignorance. People are just simply living in ignorance. They don't know any better. They're oblivious. And this obliviousness is related to their alienation. Yeah, so there's an ignorance which is in people. And then we get another prepositional phrase, on account of the hardness of their heart. So on account of the hardness of their heart. So here it is, dia again, porosin. Porosis has to do with hardening of the heart. Now, how does that hardening take place? Is this something that God does, irrespective of us? Does he arbitrarily harden hearts? I don't think so at all. Even Pharaoh's heart was already opposed to God. And so there's a hardening that takes place, but only after Pharaoh has set himself against God. So we have a hardening of our heart. And my youth counselor described this in terms of conscience, that our hearts can become unresponsive, like a conscience. We have a conscience. It's like a triangle inside of our heart. And when we do something wrong, it spins and that it pokes us inside of our hearts. But if we don't listen to that poking in our hearts, if we harden our hearts, that triangle, the edges become rounded off and we don't feel that conscience pricking us. And so we have a hardened heart. We're not able to be sensitive to hear God. And so in the gospel, we have a softening of our hearts where once again, we can be sensitive to God speaking to us in our lives. And so this hardening of a heart is kind of a serious condition that we have. Now, the otenes is picking back on these nations. So this is a relative pronoun clause. It's an indefinite relative pronoun. And there's a lot to unpack here. And I don't want to rush us through that. So we're going to have to pick this up next time right here. We're going to have an elaboration of who we've become and what we do to ourselves. We basically hand ourselves over. So our agency, which is meant to be worshiping God, loving and relating to one another in truth, instead turns in on itself and towards a bad end. And we're gonna finish that next time. So these verses 4:17 to 19 are describing the fallen Gentile world and the different levels of causality and instrumentality and really the separateness from the life of God, alienation from the life of God. It's really quite tragic. So we're going to finish this up next time and then move on to the good news of learning Christ and hearing him, which will continue next time. Well, thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Have a good week. And we'll see you next time. Take care.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.